Hello, people. Welcome to something a little bit different than what you usually get on the channel here. Previously, all my videos have been, except for the channel introduction video, episode 0, about telling new stories in the oldest possible fashion, which is straight up person-to-person storytelling. And that is going to continue here on the channel. But, as I had said in the beginning there, this is about celebrating storytelling in all its forms. And that means not just making up new stories, but discussing other people's stories. Discussing the many ways stories can be told. And one of those is something that is going to be very near and dear to my heart. And that is, we are going to be discussing the entire Rift War saga, also known as the Midkemia books, after the main world that these books take place on. This is a series done by Raymond E. Feist over a few decades, and is really the fantasy series that got me into the fantasy genre. I had been familiar with the ideas of magic and knights fighting great creatures from cartoons and movies and video games that I played in my younger years. But these books were the first real distinct fantasy books that I had played. Or, excuse me, I had read. But they were not the only ones. I have read other series since, and I have enjoyed them, but the Midkemia books will always be my core books. They will always be the series that got me there to begin with, and has always been nearest and dearest to my heart, maintaining my fandom even after I expanded it to include other authors and many other styles of doing fantasy. Unfortunately, for many fans, the Midkemia world has been concluded by its author Raymond E. Feist. He, as I said, has been working on it for a few decades, and he certainly has the right to decide when the story is over. No offense taken, but it is something that is sad, because while I did come into the series after several books had been out already, I have been following it for over half my life. It is a journey that I took along with many, many other fans, and it is one that, when it got to that last book, I was emotional. I mean, just holding the book and knowing that this was the last book, that this was going to be the conclusion to these characters, some of which I had been reading and enjoying their life story for, 20 odd years. So as part of why, even though the last book has been out for a little while now, I'm just now doing this video, is even after I read it, it's just hard to talk about it as something that's over. It's just one of those things where I really just cannot believe, after so long of following these books, that there's going to be no new material. Yes, I can always reread the books. I've read every single book in the series at least twice. I mean, I am certainly never opposed to rereading, but it's not the same. This is a video, though, about celebrating, and we are going to celebrate by giving people a brief run-through of the series and touching on some things that made it the series that I always came back for. If there was a new Midkemia book, I was going to get it. Now, amusingly though, the series for me did not begin with a book. It began with a video game. After Mr. Feist had put out a few books in the series, he partnered with Sierra Games to produce a PC-based role-playing game set in his universe that he helped with the script and dialogue for, called Betrayal at Krondor, which ended up being a massive bestseller. And this is the cover for it right about here. And it did, as I said, sell a lot of copies. And 5-6 years later, got a sequel called Return to Krondor, which we have the cover art for right about now. Yay! Technology and image searching. The good thing is that these games are both quite old now by gaming standards, and as such are freely available to download on the internet for those people who want to play them. Both games brought very innovative features to the RPG genre and are great games to play. I, in fact, got my copy of Betrayal at Krondor as a free copy I got with a gaming magazine subscription. And while I did thoroughly enjoy the game, the biggest enjoyment I got out of it was the world and the characters. It really was written and like no other RPG I had played before. And I had played several RPGs before this. I was, I'd done the Dragon Warrior, Dragon Quest. I had done Final Fantasy. I had done your Earthbound. And, a variety. Most of your big classics started in the 8-bit era, 16-bit era games. I had played them. So, yes, there was something that stood out in the script of and general plot of the game and the world it was in. As I poked around the internet, I found out that the reason why is it was based on a series of books, and that the original author did have a direct hand in the game itself, which got me looking towards the books. And from there, it all went. Now, if you want to know what, I mean by a few decades of writing books, well, right about here, that is the stack of books on the bed. We're pretty much going to start going through these in a second, stack by stack. Just to give you, as I said, a quick overview of the world. So, I know this is going to get a little academic, but bear with me, folks, because, as I said, this is about teaching people who have never given this book series a chance why, for people like me, it is literally an emotional experience to talk about it and talk about it being concluded. So, let's go through the big rigmarole and the roll call. It all started with this. The original hardcover novel Magician by Raymond E. Feist. Now, I actually did not get this hardcover until recently because for the world of fiction, hardcover really is going out of style. And as I said, this book series was already several years old when I got it. You can see here on the opening pages a map of the world. This is commonplace feature even in the paperbacks, which is very good because he definitely did build a world. As different books and different story arcs took us to different continents and different time periods, and we will touch on this. But real quick, that is one of the things to note, is that his books took place over multiple generations. This meant that it was not simply, oh, here's one or two characters existing in basically a couple decades worth of stories in which only maybe 10 years passed for them. There were a couple core characters who showed up throughout the book series. This would be Pug and Tomas. We will, of course, keep talking about them as we go. But generally, after the first couple books, they were relegated to minor appearances, and Tomas himself did not even appear in every book. Sometimes he was only a quick passing mention because these books were the story of a world and several generations of events that shaped this world and its history. So, the beauty, though, is you're not actually going to find a paperback of Magician. This is one of the first things that kind of threw me, because when it went to paperback, and you can see it's a pretty decent thickness book, we got a split. Magician Apprentice. One of these days I'm going to figure this trick out. Magician Apprentice is the first book in the paperback series. First half of Magician. It covers Pug's childhood and how he became, as the title suggests, an apprentice magician. We then get Magician Master, which discusses his early adulthood, first marriage, and introduces his first child, as well as finishes up the story in Magician, where the world of Midkemia encounters the Surani, which were aliens from another world, who had some ancient connections to the race of the Midkemians, but in the present time we're looking more for conquest. Peace accords were made, life changed for both planets. Midkemia Master does give us some time on the planet of the Surani, but not a lot. And even in this first novel, especially Magician Master and the closing chapters of Apprentice, we definitely get the precedent set of focusing on different characters, including the nobility of Arutha, Martin, and Liam, who would by the end of Magician become three of the most important ruling royals for the main kingdom in Midkemia, the Kingdom of the Isles. And their family direct bloodline descendants would continue to factor into the history of this world as the novels took place. The direct sequels were Silverthorn and A Darkness at Sethanon. These two books are often bandied together with the two Magician books as the Rift War saga, as they tie up some loose plot ends from the Magician novel, as well as were initially the conclusion of the first generation of Midkemian heroes and nobility. Aruthag himself gets married, and after meeting thief Jimmy the Hand and bringing him into the palace and setting him on his own path of destiny as Squire James, peace seemed to settle in the kingdom, as well as Pug and Tomas getting a better sense of their own destinies, including Tomas getting a little bit more of a hint as to the events that caused his own magic enhancements that have given him the lifespan of an elf, which, of course, to all people who know anything about fantasy, is a few centuries, thus explaining why Tomas gets to stick around until the end. This are great books. Besides introducing us to Jimmy the Hand, or Squire James, depending on when you're talking to him, who is one of the core characters for the next several books, as well as his descendants continuing to factor into the history of the kingdom. We are also introduced to Pug's adopted daughter, Gamina, as well as the idea of Pug starting up a magic school through which many magicians would find themselves able to freely study and practice magic, bringing about a change in the history, as had been hinted about in Magician and a few others. Being magically inclined kinda got you a lot of hatred in certain regions of the kingdom. But, as I said, things change, especially when a magician helps stop a war and the destruction of an entire planet by an ancient enemy. Now, as I had said, originally that was the end of the first generation of characters. However, years later, the two video games we had previously discussed got novelizations, as they had always been intended to be part of the continuity of the novel series. This is one of the benefits of having the author of your licensed game work on the scripts. This would be Krondor the Betrayal, a book that was written to bridge the gap in stories between the two games, Krondor the Assassins, and Krondor Tear of the Gods, which adapts the game Return of Krondor. Keep saying up, I don't know why, it's two. These books, as I said, were written later, but chronologically they do take place next. And they do tie up the first generation of characters, including showing us a hint of the future, as we see in these two books, especially second and third book, the growth of Pug's first son, William, and his decision to ignore his minor magical gifts for enrolling as a soldier in the Royal Military. William would show up in the later books as a more central character, so that's part of how everything ties together when, you're a great author who is keeping track of what he's doing and knows where he wants to go and where he's already been. Now next we're going to sidestep slightly. We have what is known as I'm clearly a professional. The Empire Trilogy. Daughter of the Empire. Servant of the Empire. And Mistress of the Empire. Now, these books were co-written by Raymond E. Feist and fantasy author Jenny Wirtz. These books take place on the world of the Serani and focus on their culture and how the events of the first few books that we have already discussed, as well as the slightly different viewpoints culturally of a new ruling lady, change the history of their own country, which is reflected in a minor way in the later books. I do highly recommend this trilogy for people who enjoy the Midkemia books, as I said, they are canon to the main books, and with the assistance of Jenny Wirtz, Raymond E. Feist greatly expands upon the different culture of the Serani that we had seen in bits and pieces in the earlier books, and tells a fascinating tale of sociology and politics, and how, well, without giving too many spoilers, nobody can keep secrets forever, and some things are going to have a bigger impact than anybody can expect at the time. So, I do recommend picking them up, even though they are not technically required reading for the core story. Gen 2 begins with a couple one-shot books, fingers, though they are often bandied together because they have the common theme of dealing with Prince Arutha's 3 children. First we have the twins, Boric and Erland, in Prince of the Blood. Prince of the Blood also introduces the character of Nakor, a wandering magician from another nation, the Empire of Great Quiche, who remains a major supporting character throughout the series, and is a bit wacky. He himself comes up with my favorite explanation for magic, which is that, in a world full of sorcerers, including himself, he states there is no magic. There is only tricks. The brief explanation of this is that he doesn't like the term magic because people say magic, they hear magic, and they think, this is something ethereal, something you can't understand, something you can't control. Oh, no, you don't have to understand how that works. You can't explain it. It's just magic. But it's not. Magic has rules. Magic has structure. And if you open your mind, anybody can understand magic. It's just doing tricks. It's like juggling. First time you see a juggler, you think, oh man, that's got to be magic. He's got like 3 balls in the air all the time. He's not dropping any of them. He's not looking panicked or uncoordinated. I can't understand how he does that. That's some kind of magic. But it's not. It's a trick. It's something you practice and work towards. That's his basic explanation, and it's about the best one I've ever heard, because you take that basic juggling example and it applies to the real world. There's nothing that can't be done if you have the dedication to practice it and open your mind to understand different ways of looking at things. Now, personally, these are good books to read, as King's Buccaneer introduces us to a new nation, the nation of Novindus, which greatly factors into the later books, but honestly, they're not my favorite two books in the series. Prince of the Blood has some chapters that kind of drag, and King's Buccaneer, as you can see here, is a little bit longer than Prince of the Blood, and partly because of them introducing a new country with its own culture and rich tapestry of characters, that there is a point of kind of disconnect with the earlier books. You do at times kind of, question when you're reading this without having read the later books or knowing much, that if this really matters. But it does, partly because, as I said, Mr. Feist has a great mind for not wasting anything. I'm just saying perhaps some of these leading characters, some of these children of Rutha, maybe aren't as interesting as some of the characters from the first generation. But that's okay, because they are good characters and they are solid enough stories. Just, to me, not quite as entertaining as some of the earlier ones or some of the later ones, but that's my personal opinion. We do encourage you to read the books and make up your own mind, because, as I said, they are still good stories in and of their own right. Now, this is the second generation. We do still see familiar characters like Arutha, Liam, Martin. Oh, and their sister Caroline. I admit I did forget to mention her earlier, but she does play a regular role in Magician and does continue to pop up here and there in the later books. So, you do see the point of transition here, as these are the first books that start making it clear that this is a story that will span many years and many characters, and that bloodlines can have many heroes in them. But as we do touch on in these books, and some of the later ones involving Jimmy's children, that can also be kind of hard living in the shadow of a hero. Next, we have our first 4-book series. This is kind of a bit of Generation 2, kind of a bit of Generation 3. As Pug's son, William, who we had mentioned in passing earlier, gets a little more center stage, and we get our first full-on Second War. This time against armies from Novindus, which had shown up in the previous book, King's Buccaneer. Starts with Shadow of a Dark Queen. Then we get Rise of a Merchant Prince. Whoop. The joys of single take filming. Rage of a Demon King. Followed with Shards of a Broken Crown. These books do introduce us to a whole set of new characters, many of whom are interesting in their own right, though we do still have Pug and Nakor, as well as the returning Tomas, and we get introduced to some more characters that would continue to factor into Pug's ongoing attempts to be the magical protector of his world. And Shards of a Broken Crown leads to Pug kind of having a falling out with the royal family of the Kingdom of the Isles, and deciding to leave the running of his academy to his best students and teaching staff, taking Nakor and a few of his select inner circle to a more isolated location where they will begin working in secret. This forms the backbone of the rest of the series, their Conclave of Shadows. As Pug realized that you cannot be connected to the royal family of one nation and still have a perspective that sees all nations on the world as worth protecting. Which makes some sense. Again, when you're dealing with threats that want to consume everything in the world, smaller politics do have to take a back step. These are, again, very interesting books in their own right, though for certain books, especially Rise of a Merchant Prince, Pug does take a back seat to these new characters and the story of how they work to save their kingdom themselves. Because again, this is a part of the ongoing theme of the Midkemia books, that one hero does not shape an entire nation. That heroes are not simply once-a-generation people. Everybody can be a hero in their own way if they have something they believe in and are willing to sacrifice for the greater good. A lesson that is definitely worth keeping in mind. This leads into the next set of books. Named The Conclave of Shadows, Exile's Return, King of Foxes, and Talon of the Silver Hawk. Oh, that's actually backwards. That would be the first one. This would be the last one. And the middle one was the middle one. What a coincidence. These books, we go back to the 3-book saga idea, which, again, since Magician Apprentice and Magician Master, originally written as one book, is something that he did with the first trilogy, as well as the Rift War Legacy trilogy, which was the video game adaptations and the middle book. Which, 3, 4, 6, 8 books. If you've got a solid story, there's certainly nothing wrong with making your books whatever length you want to make them, and your story arcs however many books you need them to be. These books is where we get the first full view of Pug's new organization, the Conclave of Shadows, and with it, the more dedicated resource of being protectors of the realm, as Pug is no longer dividing his time between teaching and protecting. We also see the idea enter Pug's mind that was first set up in the previous Serpent War Saga 4-book series, that Pug himself is aware that no matter how much magic is keeping him alive, it has not made him immortal, and that he will one day die, like many of his loved ones he grew up with who have already passed on. This mortality is, of course, part of what makes a hero heroic. They're not invincible. They're not immortal. No matter how much power you have, if you know you're going to die one day, you know it could be any day in any act of heroism, so that's the sacrifice. Even for the big, powerful main protagonist. Reminding us of that is, of course, a brilliant stroke. Not just showing near-death experiences, but the fallout of them. Of acknowledging that you cannot do everything yourself. That you have to rely on other people if you want to live long enough to make sure everything is at peace, and will be that way. Hence why Pug forms the Conclave of Shadows. And, as I said, is an ongoing theme of the Midkemian books, that you can't just rely on one hero all the time to swoop in and save the day. Everybody's got to fight for what they believe in. Very interesting books. Again, further details the world as we are seeing more of the different nations, not just the Kingdom of the Isles, and their ongoing history, and politically how they interact with each other. As, just like in the real world, hey, every nation wants to be the best nation, and most of them believe they already are. As I've said, this is one of the strengths of the Midkemia books and Mr. Feist's writing, that he does get into everything. He is a world builder. He's not afraid to show politics. He's not afraid to show varied cultures. He's not afraid to have characters grow old and pass the torch on to their descendants, or even new heroes from different families. Now, the next books we get are the Dark War Saga. Another trilogy. Flight of the Nighthawks, Into a Dark Realm, ending with Wrath of a Mad God. Now, these books, as well as the last books in the whole franchise, take place almost immediately after the previous trilogy. Starting with Conclave of Shadows, the series sticks to one generation. This is the last generation of stories being told, and they directly feed off and into each other. Things are heating up, folks, and we are getting the first signs that the events that have been going on throughout the book series, even as far back as the original Magician, have all been interconnected and are all part of a greater game being played, even at the level of the gods of this world. Because evil is evil. And all sentience and free will, even at the cosmic deity level, evil can exist. We are introduced to more realms, more opponents, and more deeper looks into existing realms and concepts, including what previous books had established as angels and demons, essentially beings of higher and lower dimensions, as opposed to the Serani, which are in the same dimension but an alien planet. Yes, folks, Mr. Feist does go in the fantasy route of establishing that those we consider demons are not actually from the place you go to when you die. That the afterlife is not necessarily hell. If you're bad, I mean, it'll suck for you, but It's not all together. But we're not going to get too heavy-hearted into that. And again, these are concepts introduced in earlier books, but expanded more upon in these later books. Now, as I said, these books all are going to tightly tie into each other, which leads us to the next arc, which is a 2-book arc. At the Gates of Darkness and Rides a Dread Legion. These books deal with some new races who bring news of old enemies, and who, as we've been discussing, culturally, politically, are going to have to learn to get along with everybody else. Because you can invade, you can conquest, but if you keep doing that over and over again, and never stop to live in peace, you're going to end up with nobody left. Either nobody left to fight against, or nobody left on your side. And more importantly, as Pug continues to, along with the Conclave of Shadows, get deeper into the mysteries of the enemy that has been around since even before Pug was born, and been scheming behind the scenes throughout the course of all of these books, we learn from these new beings and these new cultures. It's part of what makes Pug perhaps the greatest magician of his world's entire history, if not a couple other worlds, that he understands everything can teach you something. Don't be ethnocentric. Especially when dealing with completely alien worlds that have already demonstrated, hey, they know things you don't like, you're out there, and how to get to you. This leads us all into the final set of books. The Chaos War Saga. Everything comes to a head. A new war starts up in a kingdom besieged. A crown imperiled, as nobility and common folk alike are threatened by an enemy they can't really comprehend. And Pug faces the truth of who he is, what he has been fighting his whole life, and that there really is only one thing when you get to the last battle, and that is Magician's End. Appropriate title for what is referred to right there on the cover. The Rift Wars are over. The end is here. Pug, the magician of the first novel, the man who has been struggling, defying death, faces his end. The foe that he cannot beat alone. The enemy that has been threatening him from the get-go, has been threatening his loved ones for generations. And yes, his best friend, his foster brother Tomas, returns to the fray as Tomas himself finally understands why he was given the power and longevity he was. Tomas, who has grown into a unique being for any world, in any of the dimensions, faces his own destiny and his own final battle. Right alongside Pug. And folks, I'll tell you, just remembering these chapters, remembering that scene where the two of them reunite on a battlefield, both knowing that the other knows they're facing their end together. like the brothers they have always been in their hearts. I mean, it's heart-wrenching. I mean, we've discussed a couple dozen books here. A life that has crossed 5 generations or so. I think a little more, because I think he skipped a couple generations, but life longer neither of them thought they would get as children. A life full of war, peace, lovers, children. And at the end, they faced the end together. Walking away from the few people left that remembered them. When it's all said and done, I mean, yeah, they're heroes, they won the day. But it was the end. It was the magician's end, and it was the end of what could only be considered an epic story. That truly shows what makes a hero a hero. Somebody who, no matter how many times they enjoyed living in peace with their loved ones and pursuing calm hobbies that don't have any major impact on the world around them. Well, as Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility. That's how it is for heroes. That's how it was for Pug, and that's how it was for Tomas. And everybody they met in between Magician and Magician's End. If you want to be a hero, you have to sacrifice. You have to sacrifice of yourself. And you can't just do it once. A lifetime of being a hero is a lifetime of sacrifice, and it's heart-wrenching. It's tragic. It's dramatic. But they are great stories to tell. They're stories that inspire. And these stories, they did inspire me. They inspired me to think more about my own heroes and my own characters. They inspired me to think more about the heroes I love, including ones I've encountered after I started reading these books. What they all have in common. Certain personalities, certain kinds of conflicts they oppose. So, I encourage you to read all the books. I encourage you to check out other things that Mr. Feist has written and works by other authors, whether it be fantasy, sci-fi, straight action, anything. Because I am the story sage, and I know that all stories have conflicts. All stories have protagonist and antagonist. Everything has a beginning and an end. And those that are left behind, whether it's the people in the worlds that exist in the pages, or the readers who find themselves touched on an emotional and spiritual level by these stories, we're the ones left behind to learn from these heroes. And to be better people as a show of respect to what those heroes sacrificed. So, in conclusion, Raymond E. Feist, I'd like to thank you for inspiring me as a writer, inspiring me as a person, writing so many great books that No matter where they rank on the list of Midkemia books from favorite to least favorite, they are all great books. It is a world that will always stay in my heart, and even though you may never write another tale in the history of this world, your tales are never going to die. Not as long as people like I exist to keep telling fans this is what stories are all about. Enjoy, folks, and I'll see you another time.